for like the last 4 years, I was going back regularly because I started playing with my other band called Number Two a bunch, and we recorded a record and actually put it out almost a year ago tomorrow. So I was going back to Portland regularly, seeing all my old friends, and they always come through here. Quasi was just here last night.
What brought you out here?
Well, after the second Number Two record, I needed to like make money. Music just wasn't, I couldn't make a living.
So you moved to the most expensive city in the...
Well, it turned out, so like what I do for a living, to make money is I'm a video editor. And I came out here to do that, and it was great. Like I got a great job right away. And, normally people, when they move to New York City, they have to pay their dues, and it's brutal. And it was really easy for me. I mean, eventually it got brutal. It's a relentless place to live. But, at first it was so much fun and great because I had a killer job and like was suddenly making money, which I never did as a musician.
I mean, I moved out here right after college and did a few internships, and that was a pretty...
Where'd you go to school?
I'm from California. I went to school in Santa Cruz.
Oh, okay.
That was a pretty miserable few years, but obviously if you got a job lined up, you've got not only like...
I didn't have it lined up.
Oh, you didn't have it lined up? You moved out here. Okay, so you did do that. Yeah,
I just came out and got it. And I mean, it ended up being connected with people from Portland, like that's who they were my first freelance client, and then boom, it was great. It was really awesome.
Portland's becoming more and more like this. Obviously, I assume the case was fairly different in the like late 80s, early 90s. But this is a place where if you don't have like a trust fund or a nest egg, it can often be really difficult to pursue your dreams because you can't not work here.
Yeah, for sure. The cool thing about Portland when Heatmiser, especially like around this time of this record, was that it was really cheap. And at a certain point, both Elliott and I ended up unemployed and got unemployment. And Elliott got it for like a year. And it was great because it was, I mean, all you had to do was like phone in once a day and you could answer the questions like on a push button phone. You could answer the questions before they asked it. You'd be like 11211 and then you're through with your daily thing that you needed to check in with. And it was plenty of money to live by when, we were in our 20s and didn't have mortgages or kids or anything like that. So, and it's actually why we could play in bands, because otherwise it was, we worked all the time. As soon as unemployment ran out, and it eventually did run out, you just had to work.
I work in publishing, which means that I've been laid off twice. And I, was freelancing, but I did the unemployment thing, and it lasted, as it often does, it lasted a lot longer than I would have liked to. Like I actually like working, and like I feel this is my own issues, but I feel like bad when I'm not working.
Yeah, of course.
And I feel like they go out of their way to make the process as miserable as possible.
Who does?
Unemployment office.
Oh, right. For sure.
I live in Queens, and there's just like, I remember for like one of the low points in my life was, those school desks where it's a combination like desk chair, the desk kind of comes out of the chair. It's one piece. I just remember sitting in a unemployment office in, I think, Jamaica, Queens, with the neon lights, just sitting in this like tiny child's desk, and just feeling like this is as bad. Hopefully, this is as bad as it gets for me.
Was it?
Yeah, I'd say so. Well, from a job perspective, for sure. You know, life is like that. I find in my own experiences that bad things tend to cluster. I don't know if you've experienced that too, but bad things sort of come pretty close together for me. Maybe it's a self-fulfilling thing. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Were you editing video at the time?
Which time?
Sorry, to get back to the sort of the salad days, the early
of
days
Heatmiser? No. When we arrived in Portland in the summer of '91, I got a job at a copy shop. That is a very early 90s Pacific Northwestern job. Yeah, except it wasn't like Kinko's. It was this place called TIS Business Services, which stood for Technical Imaging Services Business Services. And it was run by Christian fundamentalists, which was really funny because I'd go there in my Queer Nation t-shirt and they didn't say anything. And all the bike messengers who were, they were super punk rock, who were just hanging out in front of the store, delivering all these, blueprints to architects around town and stuff that we would run. So it was pretty weird.
I have a lot of cartoonists on the show, and the ones who have been around for a while, the ones who got their start in the 80s, they all had Kinko's jobs. Because you could run off your zines there. Yeah.
Sam, who eventually joined Heatmiser, worked at Kinko's. I remember.
So you and Elliott went to college together, correct?
Yeah.
And the two of you moved to Portland, and the plan was to just become full-time musicians?
Yeah. That's why we decided it on the summer before our final year of school. We were at a 4th of July party, and we were like, what are we going to do? And we just kind of looked at each other like, why don't we be in a band? And then suddenly we were really excited. And, so we did it. It made the last year of school bearable because we had a plan. And we also started developing songs for the band like that whole last year.
It's one thing to say, let's be in a band, and it's another thing to say, let's have the band be the thing.
I mean, we didn't know what the fuck we were doing, like it was like, we didn't know we were just like, we'll go to Portland and we'll play music. You can do that there. He was from Portland, so he knew, he went to high school with a bunch of musicians, and, it was really important for us to have a great drummer, and he knew Tony, and Tony was amazing. So it was, and Tony was like producing Poison Idea, like it was really great. Like, so we asked him if he would do it, and he said yes. And then we were like, okay, all we need to do is move to Portland and find a bass player. And then which we did.
You can't walk down the street without bumping into a bass player.
No, it was hard. I mean,
really?
we didn't, even though Elliott was from there, he didn't know like people our age. He didn't know a lot of people our age, except for the people he went to high school with, and they all left. So it was just in going to see bands. There were a lot of bands in Portland, a lot. And we would just go see bands, and we went and saw this band called M99 that Brant played in, and it was really good. They were very rock and roll. And we were going to try to steal him from M99. I think maybe Elliott talked to him, and then they parted ways. And that day, the day we found out that Brant wasn't in M99 anymore, we got him in Heatmiser. And then, bang, we were off.
That would have been a much more difficult conversation with him being, hey, leave this actually good band that you're in and come join our band that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah. Yeah, that wouldn't have happened. But it worked out. So we were off as soon as we had him.
The Poison Idea connection is very interesting to me. Was there a connection at all to the hardcore scene at the time?
Oh, well, I mean, Heatmiser, the first two Heatmiser records are co-produced by Slayer, the Slayer hippie, Steve Hanford, who's the drummer in Poison Idea. So, I mean, they were the only hardcore band I ever saw there. There was, Napalm Death. Was there. Napalm Beach, not Napalm Death. I don't really remember what they were like. But there was just a vast variety of different things going on. There was like this sort of tribal band called Hitting Birth. And they would like sell out ballroom sized places, and put on these really elaborate shows. And then there was like the leftover from like the Paisley Underground bands, like the Dharma Bums, and they would sell out huge places. And then there was like the beginning of like the alternative punk rock stuff, like Cracker Bash. I'm forgetting bands. But then also when we arrived, it was just right when Sub Pop started reaching over into Portland, and they had signed Pond, which was a 3-piece. And it's not the same Pond that is like if you go like onto Spotify and try and find Pond, it's like, that's not the Portland band. But Sub Pop signed them, and suddenly they were like a big deal. And we were actually rehearsing in the same house as them. And so we started meeting all of these same people and ended up going on tour with Pond years later. But, just started meeting people. That's how we found Frontier Records, was through the Dharma Bums. And,
especially that time, Seattle really bubbling up. There's a lot going on in Olympia at the same time. Was there a lot of bleed over?
K Records was a big deal when we got there. And then friends of mine were super into K, and especially
and obviously you've got the Slater Kinney 6 Degrees of Separation.
They were later. So it was, actually, I don't know when the first Slater Kinney record, the very first one, came out, but, I mean, by the time Janet joined, it was much later. So, I remember, I think we played Olympia. I don't remember. Here's the thing. I've forgotten almost all of this stuff. In fact, Tony sends me these recordings. He started sending me mixes, and I was like, where did this come from? I didn't remember it at all.
I don't know how much of this is COVID. I've never had a great memory, but I don't remember last week.
Yeah.
When I ask you questions about stuff from, 30 plus years ago, I'm not expecting that fine a level of detail.
There was just it was like a big, it felt huge to me. When we landed in Portland, there was like The Rocket and Snipe Hunt and, Willamette Week and all these publications that would write about music. Some were totally dedicated to just Pacific Northwest music, and they all were really opinionated. And there was just pages and pages of stuff about hundreds of bands. There were so many bands, and you could play, and then there would be like places popping up to play all around, and you could go like some new place would come up and we'd just go play there. They'd call us and be like, yeah, we'll go play. And people would come. It was amazing. When I went back to do number 2 and it's, 30 years later, it was so completely different and way harder.
You were established, at least, you've been through the industry. And
we had records out and everything.
Yeah.
Friends and all that stuff, but it's not the same. There was something really special about the Pacific Northwest and about the fact that so many people would just come out and go see music. And it was this it was so culturally relevant and people were really dedicated to it and very tribal about it, but they belong, you had a sense of belonging for sure. It was great.
I think with something like that, when you're talking about the most recent record and getting back into it, it's hard to untangle obviously there have been a lot of fundamental changes to Portland, and what is just that, that people who are familiar with this stuff, they're not the same, 20, 21 year olds early on. And, a lot of them have kids. They're not coming out to shows like they used to.
Right. I think our relationship to music has changed, because of the formats have changed and there's no gatekeeper anymore. It's a kind of this massive level playing field and it's your job to carve out your audience and find people and connect. And you have to learn how to do that. And it's easier to learn how to do that when you're really young and aren't used to doing it a certain way. But it's still people, there's still so many people in Portland who go see music. So it's still great.
Part of the question about a spillover, or however I phrased it before, from Seattle is from the standpoint of, and this is all what I understand, from years and years later. I wasn't in the scene. I wasn't even super conscious about music at the time, but I get the sense that once a Nirvana comes along, the way that major label record companies and radio was set up at the time, that they were just hoovering up like anybody who was tangentially connected to that band or that scene.
Definitely. And so there was a lot of competition and a lot of skepticism about any band that suddenly appeared that sounded like that, which is what we did. We didn't know. We moved there right before Nirvana or Nevermind came out. That came out the summer of '91. So it was suddenly like, oh my God, there's like a groundswell, and that has benefits and also deficits. It was competitive. But when I look back at it, it's also like, that's just kind of the nature of being of a bunch of artists in a community who are really intense about their art and want to be good at it. And so you see people, you get blown away, and then you're like, you got to level up. And, that's what it ends up being like. That's what it felt like, is, you had to level up really as fast as you could.
Being in a band with two songwriters, was there a little friendly competition between the two of you?
Totally. I mean, yeah, for sure. We were really excited to be in a band. And so that wasn't really the competition in terms of songwriting wasn't really the focus of our anxiety, it was way more about how are we going to do this? How are we going to get shows? How are we going to afford a van? How are we going to be able to rehearse enough? You know, like, is everybody committed to this? How are we going to find a record label? How are we, how are we going to get the next show with that's decent, that isn't, playing the nobody or whatever? There was so much of that stuff going on, but then in the band, it was just fun, especially in the beginning. It was really fun.
Given the later stuff and, given what Elliott sounded like solo, obviously a lot of like spillover there from as far as the songs go, it sounds like the two of you were kind of going in different directions musically toward the end.
Well, I mean, he got on his path and was like, just went for it. And it was so totally clear to everybody that was like creatively the right way to go. But like, I didn't want my band to break up. And so I wasn't, and I liked being in a rock band. I liked drums, so it, there wasn't, we were also loved bands that changed dramatically from record to record, like that's what the Beatles did. That's what Elvis Costello did. That's what David Bowie did. That's what, REM did that. So we loved that and we embraced the change, like fully. So, once Elliott started getting on a roll and, found an audience that, connected with his quieter music, the band quieted down, there was no way to, that was a natural thing to happen.
It's hard to do like a punk song and then to go back and forth.
I mean, I will say there's unreleased stuff from Mike City Sons, or it's Elliott's songs that are like full on some of the faster stuff we've ever done. And so it's not like he gave that up or just, wanted to shrink the palette of music that he was making. He just wanted it to be better. And the way that it got good for him was when he was by himself. So that was hard to deal with because I didn't know if the reason why Heatmiser didn't connect as well as Elliott Smith didn't connected was my fault. Because they're Elliott Smith songs in Heatmiser. I don't, it's the same songwriter. But it was a weird time. Like that was not easy to deal with just because it would attack my confidence and then I couldn't be creative. That's where like at least the conflict inside me in the band was.
Something that I've had to work on is the very obvious realization that if you surround yourself, I like to surround myself with talented people who are really good at what they do. And then invariably those people are gonna, there's just a lot of like rocket ships sometimes. And I'm trying really hard not to begrudge people who I really like for their successes, but it can be hard.
Yeah, it can be. I didn't want it to break up my band. Like that's the thing. It's like those records that Elliott made were so fucking good that it was like, I mean, why I didn't feel like I needed to be bummed about it, like it didn't, the fact that his solo records were good didn't bum me out. What would bum me out is if like he got he was doing interviews one after another, and he got in a bad mood, started talking shit about our band. And then it's like, you're talking shit about yourself.
Is that a hypothetical, or is that something that actually happened at the time?
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, he would. It's hard for me to remember specific stuff, but I remember standing in a record store and reading an interview with him where, you know, he was bemoaning essentially loud rock music. And it's like, well, then don't write it. It's like, that's fine. I don't, you know, I wasn't the one telling him he had to do that. So it was weird that, but it was also, I'm reading it in a publication. It wasn't a conversation with him. When we were together and we would talk about this stuff, he never said that shit. You know, he never gave any indication that he wanted Heatmiser to break up. It was more that he just wanted it to be good. And so, like, how are we going to do that? And he was very opinionated about that, which was the right thing to be opinionated about.
It's not that it wasn't good. Obviously, it's not that it wasn't good, but he wanted it to be something different. Yeah,
there was a lot of creative people in a band, but then there was also, like, it had more machinery to it than his solo stuff. Eventually, his solo stuff had a ton of, like, music industry machinery in place.
What do you mean by machinery?
Like a manager, a publisher, a major label, booking agent. People who have a vested interest in his success as a solo artist, and, you know, like Heatmiser's competition. That stuff became very tense. You know, like the fact that there were simultaneous record labels and simultaneous tours. You know, that's just where, like, well, what are we going to do? When we were making Mike City Sons, I spent months just by myself in our studio. It was weird.
This all happened pretty soon after the Virgin thing.
Yeah. So, yeah, we're now start talking about stuff that's, like, happened far after the music of Heatmiser, the thing that's coming out. So it's like a really. It was a big change between the start of the band and the end of the band. And at the start of the band, what to me is interesting about these recordings is that we were having fun. And it comes across. I was really surprised when I heard it. I was like, oh, this is awesome.
As far as, like, as your memories clouded it?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it was a hard breakup for me because it went on for a long time and it was unclear what was really going to happen. And then it ended and the band was over. Elliott called me up, said, you know, I'm going to do this DreamWorks thing and they need to. The only way I can sign to DreamWorks is if we end the contract with Virgin. So I want to say that Heatmiser's broken up. And I just said, okay. I mean, we didn't have any plans to be doing anything. Then, of course, we started recording together right after that. And he helped me with all the demos for the #2 record. And I made his record covers. I made Either Or and XO. And so we continued to work together, but it was just, I forgot the question I was answering.
What does it mean for it to take a long time for a band to break up?
We just didn't talk about it. You know?
So it's like a relationship breaking up.
Yeah. Oh, it's exactly like that. But it's more complicated because there's more people. And and I just can't say this enough. It never was like, you know, Elliott never said to me, this is the last thing I'm doing, and then it's over.
With the band?
Yeah. I've never said anything like that. It was just kind of, he might have said that to other people, but he didn't say it to me. And so, you know, like, it had gotten weird. But we'd made Mike City Sons, and we were on a major label. We could make another record, get more money, could do that, you know. We weren't on a deadline, but it just didn't work out that way.
Is this the first time that you've re-engaged with the early stuff?
Oh yeah, in like decades. Because when it did end, I was like, okay, I'm leaving this behind, and we just dropped it. And I threw myself into putting together another band and trying to make a record that was good, you know? And that's what I concentrated on until like I just couldn't do that anymore. And then I moved to New York, you know, and then I wasn't a musician once I was here. I was an editor, and I was successful at that, which felt really good after beating my head against the brick wall of the music industry, you know, like that was hard. And so I just didn't ever listen to Heatmiser.
Are you able, when you look back and reflect on it, are you able to see the successes? You
know, when I look back, I remember how it felt. And I don't remember any facts.
Well, it's an opinion question because, you know, the way you framed it is I wasn't successful as a musician.
Well, I mean, I don't want to say that because I made 5 records, and that's a hard thing to do, you know, like, thank you. But, and it is true that there are people out there who continue to listen to them. And I'm very thankful for that. And I'm thankful I got to be in Heatmiser. Those guys are fucking cool. All of them. And I'm still friends with all of them. But, you know, it ended, and it was a heartbreak, you know, like it's like getting divorced, because it's your property is all tied up with each other, you know, your livelihood, everything, all that had to get unraveled. And then you start all over again, and you're just like, fuck, I have to start all over again. And I was so young that I didn't know how to do it except by, you know, charging ahead.
You rebounded really quickly, it sounds like.
So when did Mike City Sons come out? Like 96 or something? And then number 2, the first record, came out in 99.
Okay.
So it took a while for us to pull it together.
You know, you started playing, and obviously it takes a while to make that first set of songs.
Going back and hearing it, could I appreciate it now? Yes, I can definitely appreciate it. I can also hear, it's really obvious to me, like, especially these recordings that are coming out now, what immediately struck me is that I knew they were only done in the first or second take because we didn't have any money, and we were recording like 10 songs at a time. You know, I think we might have had 2 days in the studio. So that's how we sounded. There's no
studio magic.
Nah, you know, like that's it. And when we came to our first record, Dead Air, we ended up re-recording everything, which was probably a big mistake because it kind of drove out the joy in some of it. I like our first record, especially like Blackout. And that's probably one of my favorite songs of Heatmiser. I love that song. And that came after after this set of recordings. But I do wish that we just used some of this stuff instead, because there's like a lightness to it. There's an effortlessness to it that feels good.
I'm going to be a little on the nose about it, but it's punk rock.
Right. It is. I mean, but it's also, well, it's music, like, cause music is chemistry captured in a moment, you know, and it's, but at the time, I don't know why we redid it. Probably because we were all really into recording and we thought we could make it better. You know, we wanted to spend money on it. Like, oh, we need to spend money on this to make sure it sounds even better. We were very ambitious in the studio.
I have to imagine that Sam joining the band, that's got to be a nice little jolt to the system.
Yes. It was, it didn't feel like a jolt. It felt like things like chilled out, because by the time we parted ways with Brant, there was a lot of tension in the band, and it just ended when, well, it didn't fully end because it just got built up.
Sure.
With, between different, especially between Tony and Elliott, it got really...
It reset.
Yeah. But Sam came in and was like, I'm just helping out. You know, he never said he was our bass player, but both Elliott and I knew that we weren't going to ever find anyone better than him. And even though we tried, it wasn't going to work without him. And playing with Sam he can access his id, you know, like it's intense, but that intensity isn't like in the van when you're with him. You know, it's like,
he's not Henry Rollins.
He's a sweetheart and a fundamentally decent person. And it was just like immediately a brotherhood.
What were those tensions? Is it just like regular dudes in their 20s band stuff?
It was fights over how stuff sounded, about how things should be recorded. That, it wasn't like, Elliott wasn't saying that Tony was an asshole, like a bad person. He would get really uptight about the way the cymbals sounded, or, in a recording. Or he would also get, after he'd made his second solo record, he wasn't really interested in really someone who could play so precise, which is weird because he's really precise. Elliott was exceptionally precise. So it was just like this, I want you to be precise, but not in that way, which is a ridiculous thing to say to somebody, because they're just like, I'm just being who I am. And I'll add that Elliott came to understand that he was unfair. Later on, long after we broke up, last time I saw him, he admitted that he'd been unfair to Tony.
And I think this is really important. You mentioned that Sam was a pleasant person to have in the van, because there's no scenario in which you put a bunch of dudes in their 20s in a band for an extended period of time and there isn't some tension bubbling up.
Well, yeah, of course. You're living in very close quarters. But I mean, we didn't tour that much. So the tension was really about how the records were going to sound. I mean, not really. All of us were very much wanted to make beautiful records.
Was there a honeymoon period at all with Virgin?
it took a really long time for the deal to get worked out, because from the beginning of their interest to the time we signed, Elliott had become a successful solo artist.
Yeah.
And also, we'd never signed our deal with Frontier. So the day we signed to Virgin was also the day we signed our Frontier contract. And it ended up being, we just signed 2 really bad deals, so we would never do something like that, like never sign away the rights to our master recordings or anything like that. But
it's a thing that people understand now.
I mean, we kind of understood it, but the thing is it's like, the band was held together by momentum. And if we were going to slow down, that's when it would fall apart. And so it was just kind of like charge ahead. Let's just keep doing it. You asked if there was a honeymoon period. There wasn't, but there was a smooth period. And I remember it was late in recording Mike City Sons where it really felt like it smoothed out, because Elliott and I had a ton of overdubs that we had to get done in this like a 2-week period, and it was just us in the studio, and we were working, and it was amazing. It was great. We got a ton done, and there was no tension, and we just worked really hard together. It's great. We were excited about what we were making, and it was getting close to being done, and we were going to go mix it, and it was going to be awesome. And so there were periods where it felt good.
I ask partially because some of the clips, some of the video clips that are floating around places like YouTube have a little like MTV2 logo in the corner. So there was a push.
You mean like the video for Plainclothes Man or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Virgin kicked it down to Caroline as soon as we finished the record, because they could see that we kind of were like, here's the record. We need to like take a break instead of like get on tour and go. We did go on tour, but by then Tony wasn't playing.
You did the worst possible thing for your momentum.
Yes. Yeah, I think there was a little bit of energy put behind that record, but the band was just kind of like, I had to let go of this. It was difficult to make, and nobody wanted to stay in that atmosphere.
Again, we were discussing Sam coming in, and I partially asked because it was a case of a member leaving and a new element coming in. Was there ever any potential that there could be a Heatmiser without Elliott?
I mean, I didn't consider that. What would be the point? I mean, it would just be start a band with Sam.
It's a group of guys you've been playing together, and you like each other, and you've been producing good music.
Yeah, I mean, none of us really would have thought that. I mean, they wouldn't have. If I quit, they wouldn't have kept going as Heatmiser. Elliott was already a solo guy, so he wouldn't have done it. But no.
Did number 2 feel like did you feel like you were starting from zero?
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I demoed songs and sent them to Virgin because they had an option to pick up. And they were like, well, we've got the Spice Girls now, and that's really the focus of the label. That's literally what they said, our A&R guy. And I was like, okay. And so I was free, and I actually did feel free. Like I felt, okay, it can be anything now. And I just went back to work, started hanging Christmas lights, eventually found a job at a design agency, which is where I learned to edit. But that it was fortunate that I got dropped from Virgin. And then I hooked up with Donna Dresch's Chainsaw label, which is one of the coolest punk rock labels in the Pacific Northwest, as far as I was concerned, because it was full of queer people. And that first number 2 record, if we'd had a booking agent, like, we might have been able to ride that record longer, but it didn't happen.
At that point in time, was there ever a consideration that you just weren't going to do music after the end of Heatmiser?
No consideration, not at all. It was 100% like start a new band.
Were you discouraged though?
I was bummed I had to start all over again, for sure. I mean, but I also had confidence that that I could make something that sounded good. And I wanted to do it. I've wanted to play in a band since I was so young. I started guitar playing at 8 years old. Used to carry records around before then. Like, I played with 7-inch records. I have them in my baby pictures. And it's just been the thing that I love to do the most. And there was no question that I was going to do that. But it was only after, like, I was in my early 30s and just had to confront the fact that I can't make a living doing this. It's not working. And a lot of that had to do with just, we didn't have a booking agent.
I've talked to a number of people who at various points, a number of musicians who at various points just stopped making music. Now, obviously I'm talking to them, so in every case they started doing it again. But like, for me, the only thing that I've ever really wanted to do for a living is be a writer. And I've been able to do that, not necessarily on the terms that I hope for, but like, I consider myself very lucky that for, close to 20 years at this point, that I've been able to survive in New York City and survive on being a writer. What surprises me are these people, and I don't know where you land on this, but are these people that, like, it's their passion, it's the only thing they ever wanted to do, it's the one thing or the main thing that really brings them joy in life, and they're able to just stop. And I don't know how people just stop.
Well, I don't know how other people stop, but when I stopped, it was a big relief. Because I thought, I love music. I love it, but I don't love this. I don't love the way this feels on a day-to-day basis. And there are other things that I want to learn how to do. And I was also I was single and lonely, like, all of my time. I would go to work, come home, work on songs, go to practice. We'd have gigs on the weekend. Like, there's nothing else happening. And stopping, I also thought, maybe I'll make a record when it's kicking and screaming inside me and needs to come out, like, that's what I'll do. But I also have always loved the intersection of music and visuals, and I really wanted to develop the visual, my interests in making stuff that you could look at. And so I was lucky enough to get a job at this design agency that was transitioning into broadcast design. And so they needed somebody who could combine sounds and visuals. And I just learned how to do it, became their editor. And it felt really good. It felt good because, I was a natural at it, and people were excited when they saw it, which was not what was happening when we would go play shows on the weekend after I'd been in bands in Portland for 10 years. You know, like it was kind of like it was hard to get people to come to see you play when you've been playing all the time. You know what I mean? You're asking, like, how do you just stop? It was more like, well, to use the horrible tech bro term, it was more of a pivot, you know, like it was just like, let's do it was more like, I'm going to reorient the ship.
I'm going to redirect my creative juices.
And it fully required music to be part of it. But I just wasn't writing song.
The way you described it, when it's kicking and screaming inside of you, sounds like you were always anticipating returning at some point.
Yes. Well, I didn't know. And it was a relief to just kind of, it was a relief to not, struggle against something that felt impossible. You know, like making enough money in a band to pay everybody in the band and to pay my expenses was just, I couldn't make it happen. And every single, you know, we did the first number 2 record, and then Chainsaw was like, you need a bigger label. You shouldn't put your second record out with us. And then I couldn't find any label to do it. And it took a really long time before Alex Steiniger in Portland agreed to do it. And by the time that record came out, I was just finished. Like, you know, like I was like, this is, if I don't get some help, if this doesn't generate some interest and some help, then I can't do it anymore. And I didn't get any help. So it was a relief to develop other interests and to be excited about making stuff, and also to feel like a success at something. And so it was great. And there was a period around 2012 where I took a break from it and was like, I'm going to teach myself Logic.
You took a break from editing?
Yeah. So I'd been doing it, you know, hardcore for 7 years or whatever. Is that how long? 2005 to, 7 years. And there was a chance for me to take a break. I'd earned enough money. I could spend a few months just concentrating on stuff. And so I did that, and I just did everything that I could think of. And then I felt like I'd done it and emptied myself. And I saw, like, okay, to take this to the next stage is going to take a lot of my time. And I gotta go back to work. So I went back to work instead. And then it would just keep coming back. Like I came to realize doing advertising and putting songs in ads was starting to make me cynical about songs. And that alarmed me. You know, I didn't want this thing that I loved to be destroyed. And so I consciously was like, okay, I'm going to stop at making ads, and I'm going to learn how to play guitar again. And I'm going to play every day, and we're going to write, and we're going to. And it helped that, like, Paul and Gilly were like super into it. The other thing that had happened is that I got the first 2 number 2 records reissued on vinyl, and they sold out. Like, oh my God, they did better on a reissue 15 years later than when they first came out. So, it felt like I could make a record, I could play music. It doesn't have to be the way that I make a living. So that can take that pressure can be taken off. And so now, like, what do you want to make? What matters? And it was a beautiful experience being able to do that. It was back to feeling joyful about making music and feeling the power of rock music and feeling like the propulsion of it and levitating because of it, feeling goosebumps, it was great. And that wasn't there when I decided to stop, in 2002 to 2003, that visceral joy just wasn't there. So stopping wasn't hard.
So you had a record come out last year. You've got this. We're ostensibly talking about this Heatmiser reissue. As we're recording this, what is your relationship with music?
Oh, I'm working on new stuff, and open to possibilities. It would be fun to make something really killer, like the best thing that I've ever made. I would like to do that. I would like to get better and make something that connects with people more than I have been able to in the past. That there's something so viscerally thrilling about that it like makes life worth living. I would love to make another record, and so I'm working on it, but it takes me a long time.